So there are a couple of different drivers that we could speak about, but mainly it comes back to one main theme, and that's risk management. So ultimately, everything we do in security within an organization is to reduce or to mitigate risk. So the budget we spend, the skilled personnel we hire, the controls we implement, it's all to reduce the likelihood and impact of an identified risk, and ultimately to maintain business operations. So security and tabletop is one small, very component of security, becomes a business enabler. It allows organizations to be secure in their services to their clients. So that is the main driver for tabletop, and ultimately a lot of what we do in security. But there are other components as well, such as regulatory requirements, so in compliance. So regulations are drawn up and enforced, again, to reduce risk. But there are certain regulations there that do require such activities, like tabletop exercise. They may not specifically call it out. They can be vague in how they describe what needs to be implemented. So like we have regulations like GDPR, we have NIS2, we have DORA. So for example, GDPR, while it does not specifically call out or mandate an element like a tabletop exercise, the language they state, and I'll quote, it's to implement appropriate technical and organizational measures to ensure the level of security is appropriate to risk. Again, we're coming back to risk. So it can be a regulatory requirement, and some organizations need to be ensured that they do comply with these certain regulations, because ultimately, if there is a breach of data, of customer or personal information, regulators may impose fines if they found that the company was not proactively trying to reduce risk by putting certain security controls in place.
From what I've seen, delivering the incident response tabletops, organisations are looking to try and understand how their policies and controls would fare within a real incident. For a company that's not experienced an incident before, it's a very unique process to go through as an organisation. So the tabletop gives them kind of a view into what that might look like, including, some of the stresses and problems that can arise, such as, breaking down the communication, retaining control over all the different work streams, managing the different people, making sure that tasks are delivered on time, but also making sure that people aren't overworked, making sure that resources are in the correct place, that sort of thing. And technically as well, trying to just simulate, there's so many technical controls that we rely on. What happens when those controls fail, and how do we then respond to that in a kind of dynamic way? So without actually experiencing an incident, it's quite hard to know what that might feel like. So from my side, I think it just gives organisations the feel of what an incident is.
So yeah, so I'll speak to the tabletop discussion-based kind of exercises, and then Thomas will lead to the simulations where the technical components come in. So yes, a tabletop exercise is exactly what it states. So we'll sit around a table with stakeholders across from the business, anyone that has a role to play during an incident. Examples could be someone from compliance that understands the regulatory landscape and the specific requirements for, such as incident reporting and timelines and how we report incidents. Pre-exercise, what happens is we develop a scenario specific to that organization, the context of the organization and the business environment, so that we come up with a scenario that is applicable and is plausible within that organization. So we will try to understand what the critical services are in the business, which lead down to the critical resources and the systems. And we build a scenario around that. We also try to understand the threat landscape and the specific threats to that organization and what is the higher risk for those. Is it simply a denial of service on a customer portal, or is it a ransomware event on a critical database? And with all this information, then we build a scenario with a multiple of injects. And when I say injects, it means we will have usually about 2, 3, maybe 4 injects for a scenario. And it would usually play out as such. Firstly, how the incident may have occurred, whether it was a phishing email, drive-by downloads, if it was somebody that used the USB stick to exfiltrate data. And then we'll lead to more different injects, such as in a ransomware event, a database may get encrypted. That may be notified by a SOC, or it could be notified by an individual that's unable to access a company resource and application. It's not able to retrieve that data because it is encrypted. But throughout these injects, we'll sit down and we'll discuss each one individually. So it's a low stress environment, no fault environment. We're here trying to understand the current roles and responsibilities as an individual. So we're trying to, it serves as training on what our responsibility is during that incident. And then we will lead through these injects, discuss each one, and at certain points we need to take an action. And we would have what's called a scriber during that event that is noting down the time, the date, and the action taken, and the person that took that action. And we go through the different injects until we come to the end where we're working through the incident life cycle, and we eventually come to the lessons learned at the end to understand how we can utilize the information through this exercise to update our current procedures and ultimately enhance the security or the incident program.
So the incident response simulation usually begins with a consultation with the client, usually the major stakeholders, so CISO, kind of C-suite level, and we kind of work out what exactly does the client want to simulate, what kind of technology they use, what their current capacity is at the time. So do they have operational staff like analysts? Do they have decision makers, managers? Do they have legal function in-house or third-party in-house IT or third-party IT? So we kind of build up a picture of what kind of situation they're in, and then what we do is we go away and we rebuild a similar but different environment. It's a technical environment, so virtual machines, networks, that sort of thing. And then we simulate an attack on that environment based on real world examples of attacks, and trying to simulate the tools, techniques and procedures that are used by threat actors in the real world. And we generate some data from that. So we capture that data, kind of forensic data, so things that we would normally look at during an incident response investigation. And then on the day of the simulation, we get the client's staff into a meeting. Very little is said ahead of time about what exactly they'll be doing. And then similar to the what Sean described there, we have inject points. And as we move through the inject points, we're simulating an incident by providing them data. And the idea is that the participants can analyze that data, draw conclusions, ask questions to me and my team as the facilitators, and progress that incident. And what we're looking for is for the participants to show knowledge of techniques to respond to incidents, and also how to make decisions on what would impact. So things like containment, containing a host that's been compromised, containing accounts. And it's just to get an idea of the client's capacity to respond. And each inject point, the incident becomes more severe. So it starts from something like an antivirus alert and progresses slowly until a full-blown, for example, ransomware attack. And also what we're trying to do there is simulate things like breakdown in communication. So lots of different stakeholders requesting things. So the participants have to decide what's most important to what I'm working on and actually prioritize. So it can be a bit stressful, but it's kind of a way of simulating what it might feel like to be in a real incident.
So ultimately, the approach, it allows us to address both the strategic and the operational aspects of an incident response. So strategic being crisis management, the decisions that the senior stakeholders need to make, whether that's contacting your regulator, contacting customers, ceasing operations, and whereas then the technical side, I suppose, Thomas, it's the incident response team, I suppose, that are trying to contain and eradicate the actual malware, may it be. So I think together it gives a well-rounded view of the program and to highlight any gaps that have been noted through the exercise, with ultimately feeding into the lessons learned from both aspects and hopefully enhancing the overall incident management program.
Yeah, I agree. I think the two different exercises are very complementary and also necessary. So it's necessary for organizations to know what to do at a high level, but also on a technical level. Even if that's outsourcing the technical stuff to a third-party provider, having the process in place to, okay, how do we preserve the data that we need to perform the analysis? How do we invoke the correct assistance from legal? How do we notify regulatory bodies? And then how do we invoke that third-party service? Or how do we put together a crisis management team and make sure that the right people are in that team and working on the correct things? So yeah, they are very different, but very complementary indeed.